Peace, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Hub Power Hour. I'm your host for the night, Manny, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Wednesday morning, Pittsburgh City Council will be discussing a number of pieces of legislation, and one of those is changes to the Stop the Violence Fund. Now, to learn more about the Stop the Violence Fund and what this means to you and your community, please welcome Felicity Williams, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Ed Gainey, Daniel Lavelle, the Council President, representing District 6, and my big bro, Kahari Mosley, representing District 9 on City Council. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now we're going to get right into it. My first question is for Felicity. What exactly is the Stop the Violence Fund?
Absolutely. Hey, y'all. So the City of Pittsburgh Stop the Violence Trust Fund is a set of dedicated resources held in the City of Pittsburgh. They are renewed every year with a matching percentage of the public safety budget, so not decreasing police funding at all. Instead, a matching amount of public safety budget is added to this fund to tackle gun violence as a public health crisis targeting our impacted communities. This means both internal operations, so how we've been able to expand the Office of Community Health and Safety, how we've been able to create the Office of Community Services and Violence Prevention, how we've been able to expand City Parks, City Sports program, right? As well as external community-based partnerships that are critical to being successful in doing this work. So our REACH GVI team is funded with these dollars. Eviction prevention is funded with these dollars. Other community-based grassroots organizations are funded with these dollars as well. Things from youth programming, workforce development, reentry, other social services, the things we know that help us get upstream of violence and really tackle it at its root cause.
No, thank you so much. And I actually didn't know all of the positive benefits of the Stop the Violence Fund, especially the eviction prevention program, which is absolutely necessary. So my next question, you already touched on it a little bit, but this is for Daniel and Kahari. What is the purpose of the fund?
You can start, Council President. You outrank me.
Sure. Well, in order to sort of better explain the purpose, all right, I'll take that. So in order to really sort of explain the purpose of the fund, let me go back and also sort of give a little history of how we got to where we are. Be helpful. The fund was created in 2020 after the sort of uprising, and all across the country, people were calling for defund the police. And here locally, what we came to learn was that one, really the sentiment wasn't to necessarily defund them, but to reallocate resources to individuals who were doing the work that police weren't suited for. And so as opposed to actually defunding the police, what we did, to Felicity's point, is we set aside a percentage of our public safety funding to go to organizations who were proactively preventing gun violence, proactively work that all the activists were saying the police shouldn't be doing. To be 2021, then the administration took office, and they began figuring out how to begin expending these dollars. First, $1 million. This current cycle, we're going to be trying to expend $2 million. Organizations, community members that are actually doing on the ground work, violence in a day in and day out. You know that this effort has.
Sorry, I was having some technical difficulty. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, I think
Okay,
it fits.
perfect.
And I'm happy to jump in. I want to thank the Council President, for giving, that kind of context, the historical context of, the leadership that him and my predecessor, Reverend Burgess, brought to the table when they established the Stop the Violence Fund. I think what's important to note as we prepare for the standing committee meeting on Wednesday, is that, what we're trying to do now is codifying the public health approach, to formally integrate, public health principles into the administration of the Stop the Violence Fund. We're talking about enhancing the structure, the clarity, and the accountability of the fund. We've seen, in the media, various critics, trying to question the accountability and the clarity. So one of the things that we want to do, with the fund, actually proactively, is to establish that accountability, formalizing, existing processes and reporting mechanisms, and also ensuring a data-informed approach, as well as ensuring equitable distribution of funds, and finally, committing to measuring outcomes and building capacity. I think that's also really important, that, we are measuring outcomes, but also building capacity for organizations. So we're not just trying to create a long-term sustainability for the Stop the Violence Fund, but also create long-term sustainability for the organizations that make the Stop the Violence Fund so successful and so important to our work to make the city safer.
Absolutely. And there are several organizations out there doing a great job. Now, this is something that I think is, kind of important to me specifically, only because of the type of work that I'm into, some of which is, related to violence and different types of violence. Most of the time when we talk about violence, we're talking about it in a very, very particular context. So in the context of this Stop the Violence Fund, my next question to you also, Kahari, is how is violence defined?
Yeah, I mean, we look at, I think violence can be defined a variety of ways. Obviously, physical violence, but, there's also emotional violence, abuse that, folks of all ages suffer, but obviously, children oftentimes bear the brunt of that kind of emotional abuse. Folks in relationships, often are victims of that kind of non-physical violence, but also, to get, philosophical, we look at, when you, create, concentrated poverty and the causes of violence, those are all, forms of violence. And that's why we want to have this comprehensive public health approach, that looks at violence, from a comprehensive standpoint to address the root causes. I think it's, we often find ourselves in a situation where we see those want to present the solution to violence as, just aggressive policing and just more investment in the public safety and law enforcement. I think, the really important work that we've done here in Pittsburgh and work that I inherited from those that come before me, is this comprehensive approach that brings community organizations to the table as partners in that process. So it's not just a one-sided solution of, let's just flood the neighborhood, with police, kind of a 1980s, 1990s model, but really a true progressive 21st century model that brings a broad array of stakeholders to the table, folks that are looking at, food insecurity, folks that are looking at housing insecurity, folks that, are looking at, even, educational attainment and and looking at truancy and those kind of issues, all the different, inputs that create a violent environment and then put people at risk of becoming victims of violence. And I think that's what is really so innovative about the work that has been done and the work that we want to continue and want to make sure continues into the future, to address not only all the root causes of violence, but all the unique forms of violence beyond just physical violence.
Yeah. I would say, adding on to what the councilman said there, like if you look at gun violence prevention from a public health approach, the actual act of gun violence tends to be the end result that occurs. That's at the end. And so what we're trying to do, what you heard the councilman talk about, is get upstream of that and get ahead of all the other forms of violence, whether that be systems of oppression. You heard him talk about concentrated poverty, whether that be domestic situations, right? Whether that be all sorts of other acts where it's fights, right? We know that oftentimes a fight may be a preliminary indicator that could lead to gun violence later. So making sure that we're getting upstream of those incidents to stop them from ending up in being that act of gun violence.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate that very much, especially this comprehensive approach to addressing, the root causes of violence. And of course, we've already seen the results of that. So my next question is for you, Felicity. What are some common misconceptions about this fund?
Absolutely. So number one, that these are just handouts, right? That we're just giving money out to organizations. That is absolutely not what is happening. These are contracted services. These are vendors, the same way we should think about them, the same way that you would think about how we contract with partners and experts to build a bridge, to pave roads, to provide any sort of professional services that we do as a city. We should view these folks the same way, that they are partners in providing a service to public safety for the city. So that's number one. Number two, I'd probably say the most common misconception about the fund is all of the things, I explained this a little bit in the beginning, but just understanding all of the things that this fund supports, from, as I said, from internal operations to external operations as well. And then lastly, I think the biggest misconception, or what people want to intentionally ignore, is that this is working. So if we look at the data for 2024, we know that not only did the city of Pittsburgh decrease in incidents of homicides and non-fatal shootings, it is true that that is also a national trend. However, Pittsburgh has decreased at a greater rate than the surrounding Allegheny County. So we're obviously doing something a little bit different here that's working. So if you look, just putting real hard numbers to it, in 2024, homicides had decreased by 19% since 2023. That's 41% since 2022. Non-fatal shootings had decreased by 28% since 2023 and 38% since 2022. So we are seeing the results of these investments and these partnerships between traditional public safety or traditional law enforcement, our offices of community health and safety, Office of Community Service and Violence Prevention, as well as these community-based partnerships.
Those numbers are incredible, and it's kind of hard to knock the statistics whenever you read them. But of course, not everybody likes to give credit where it's due.
I think some folks just want to be willful, like they just want to ignore the data.
Absolutely, unfortunately. Okay, so my next question is more about like the logistics of the fund. You guys already talked about some of the organizations and the incredible work that they're doing. So it's a three-part question, all about, like I said, the logistics of the fund and what it's accomplished. And this is to anyone. How many organizations applied to the fund, and what criteria went into determining who was eligible for the fund? And I guess an important question for maybe some of the naysayers is how much money has been shared thus far?
Absolutely. So I'll start at least with the number of organizations, and then I'll hand it to our council president, who is a member of the current Stop the Violence Trust Fund Steering Committee, as well as Councilman Kahari Mosley as well, to talk through a little bit of the process that they have gone through in awarding grant recipients over the years. But right now, after the first two rounds, we're now in our third round of community-based organizational funding. That's what Council President Lavelle was saying at the beginning when he was cutting out a little bit there. We now have about 45 separate organizations that see themselves as part of the city's violence prevention team. Some of those organizations are specific to certain, zones. That means that they really only work in certain neighborhoods. And some of those organizations work across the city, citywide. And so it's really important about how we're building this network, this ecosystem around public safety, that partnership between traditional public safety police and community. That has been critical in what has been driving down our gun violence, our homicide and non-fatal shooting rates here in the city of Pittsburgh. And then I'll hand it over to my colleagues here to talk about some of the process that we've gone through with those organizations.
So the process has been iterative, admittedly, because when you're dealing with governmental tax dollars, it's not as simple as simply saying, I would like to give $100,000 to any one organization, regardless of who they may be, right? And so there had to be an RFP process. The very first year we did it, we actually gave the money to the Poise Foundation because we wanted to try to make it less quote unquote political, so that we were actually giving the dollars to an organization that could then use a set of criteria and then make the determination of who was actually going to receive the funding. Since then, it's been determined that the city itself should not actually give the tax dollars to an independent entity and then they disperse the dollars, but rather we should be giving the dollars directly to these organizations. And to Felicity's earlier point, which I did here, which is these are not simply grant dollars. You're actually contracting with the city to provide a service, a very real and much needed service. And so in the very first round, so Felicity mentioned the 45 organizations, there were over 100 that actually applied. But there was a minimum amount of funding that we would have to be able to give. And 43 over approximately the 100 were actually selected. We're now into round 3. And part of our round 3 is to expand the idea. Part of what we thought of very early on, but didn't necessarily know exactly how to achieve, was the fact that there are many organizations in our community that if you gave them, and I'm gonna make the number up, $15,000 to $20,000, it's helpful. But at the same time, it could also be somewhat of a burden when they have to fill out reports, when they have to go through the process of contracting with the city. That could be burdensome. One of the things we wanted to figure out was, how do we really take these organizations and build out their capacity and say, no, let's not give you $20,000 and let give you just enough to sort of drag your feet. But rather, what if we invested $100,000 in you and we did that annually? What could that really look like? How could that really build out your capacity to do this work and do it even more effectively? And so part of what we now want to do, and it's one of the amendments for the legislation, is build into the process what we're calling anchor institutions, where we could actually have organizations across our city, across the 6 police zones, that are sort of the anchor institution that directly tie into the city, but then also allows them to work with some of the smaller organizations so that we are indeed building the ecosystem that Felicity mentioned earlier. And so that's been the sort of the process up to date. But it's also been a challenge and a slow process because you are dealing with governmental dollars, and government, unfortunately, does move slow.
No, absolutely. I hear you. I'm sorry, Kahari, did you want to touch on that?
Oh, well, I mean, I think, Felicity and Council President Lavelle, covered a lot of it. I think, what they speak to, again, really emphasizes, the importance of the work that we're doing now. But, we have, a committee that's represented, myself, Councilman Bobby Wilson. We also have administration staff, but also staff from public safety. So it's a very diverse group of folks who represent various levels of city government, various departments of city government that all weigh in on the process. And when we get reports back of the work that gets done across the city, Ian does a fantastic job of, on the ground, working with the various grantees. And like the council president said, the work that we're really trying to do is build the capacity, of these organizations, because again, you can give someone, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, or, and that's a nice influx, into their coffers. But at the same time, with the strings attached and the measurements and the metrics and the reporting associated with that, it can be quite burdensome and really take away from the important work that they do, because we're hiring people to change lives and save lives and change communities, not, fill out spreadsheets, no disrespect, to spreadsheets, and Excel, Microsoft Excel, but, that's not, what, we want to provide these funds for. These funds are really to transform our city into a safer place. And that's why the work that we're doing is so important. And I think that really speaks to the vision, of Council President Lavelle and my predecessor, former Councilman Burgess, when they came up with the idea for this fund. But we really now want to ramp things up and take things to the next level to really, really bring to light and bring to fruition, the vision when the fund was first established.
And I want to say, like, I should have said this before, is one of the common misconceptions, because I think you hit on a really good point, Councilman, there about this idea that the fund is not accountable, that there isn't reporting. The reports are actually public. They are on the city's violence prevention webpage. It lists every single one of the partners that is contracted with the city by zone. So I think that's really important. But I think you also raise another really important point, Councilman Mosley, that I think we have to, challenge and interrogate ourselves a little bit about why we feel like we need such detailed reporting in this particular instance that we do not require anywhere else for any other contracted service in the city of Pittsburgh. And so again, you'll see in the legislation, we wrote in there components about being data informed, right? And ensuring that we are doing tracking and accountability. But again, what is the appropriate level? And we've got to interrogate ourselves and ask ourselves why we feel the need for this particular group of individuals around this particular group of work to require such detailed reporting and feel like it's not accountable. I just don't see that anywhere else across the city of Pittsburgh in our procurement and contracting processes.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you raised that. I wonder why we're under more scrutiny.
I mean, I have a few ideas, but
yeah, I have a few ideas as well. So you mentioned the reports that's available to the public on the website. You mentioned the crime stats. Homicides are going down, shootings are going down. So when I think about the measurable impact of the fund, of course, I think about those statistics. But I wonder, Felicity, because you're so close to this, do you have any more of a personal story or a life change, somebody that has been impacted by this work that this fund has allowed these community organizations to do?
For sure. And I think of one in particular organization in Councilman Mosley's district. So I want him to also speak to this as well, because I know he's deeply connected to this, but it would certainly be Trade Institute of Pittsburgh. Again, as we talk about what really are the root causes of gun violence, there are very few people who want to actually hurt other people, right? They want to shoot and kill people. Generally, what the situation is that they are engaged in other activities, other criminal activities, potentially even out of survival, because they are in a state of poverty, they're in a state of trauma, they are in a state of oppression, and they feel like they have no other opportunity, no other hope, no other outlet. And so one of those organizations that I know has absolutely leveraged this funding in a transformational way has been the Trade Institute of Pittsburgh with Dante Green. I mean, I can't speak to it as well as he can, but to talk about the individuals, how they have increased the individuals that they are now able to serve with this funding. They have increased their retention rates for people in the program and then seeking employment with this funding. And so again, that is helping us to redirect community members away from what might be other behaviors, other activities, into a career with family sustaining wages. And so those are the types of life-changing impacts that are so important with this funding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the work that Dante Green and his incredible staff at the Trade Institute do is life-changing. It's phenomenal. It goes beyond workforce development. It includes community building. It includes life transformation and really, just personal growth and development. I've had an opportunity to attend numerous events at the Trade Institute, meet numerous graduates from the Trade Institute, folks who have really turned their lives around, as well as participate in the redevelopment of their community. It was only about a month ago, I was with Mayor Gainey and some of his senior staff and Rising Tide Partners and the Trade Institute. And we were on Hamilton Avenue, a block that has been waiting to be redeveloped for maybe an entire generation. And to see the young people who have graduated from the Trade Institute who now participate in their spinoff program, which is a construction company doing the work that they learned how to do in the construction training program that the Trade Institute runs. But they take folks in on a very regular basis. kind of almost kind of a rolling enrollment, if you will. Young people that, you know, want to do something positive, want to transform their life, looking for a trade. And he's also built tremendous partnerships with the unions, as well as other workforce development organizations that have come into the fold. And that doesn't even speak to the amazing work he does as the head coach of Westinghouse's football team, where he's generally regarded as the best high school football coach in Western Pennsylvania. And that's not by me, because, you know, everybody knows I'm a baseball guy, but that's what I get from my friends who work in journalism and really know what they're talking about. And I like that link too, how, you know, it really connects all the way at the high school level to young adults, late teens or early 20 somethings, and creates this pipeline and really is so transformative on so many different levels, and ties, you know, what we talk about when we talk about the root causes of violence, you know, lack of economic opportunity, and also providing housing. You know, some of the folks who've been through the program were housing insecure, and they were put in positions where they were fixing up houses to create the housing for themselves. Like how transformative is that to someone's self-esteem, to be housing insecure, learn a skill, learn how to fix up a house, and then to provide yourself with the housing that you need, and provide housing and new development in the community that you grew up in. We were on Hamilton Avenue, and I don't want to belabor the point. We were talking to a young man whose grandmother lived down the street, and he was talking about how inspiring it was for him to fix up a block, you know, that's been blighted and vacant and abandoned his entire life. And now he is part of the generation from the community that is centering the process of rebuilding the community, not an outside force, not someone coming from California or Colorado or Cancun, but somebody coming from Hamilton Avenue, fixing up Hamilton Avenue. So that speaks to the transformative work that we're supporting in the Stop the Violence Fund, that goes way beyond just violence prevention and intervention, and some of the things that are more closely associated with the work. And it's good work, but the work that the fund supports.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Shout out to Trade Institute. I mean, I know quite a few folks who, you know, who have gone there over the years, and who now have careers because of the knowledge and information that they got there. Especially the housing point of that too is extremely impactful. So thank you so much. You guys already talked a little bit about those who are, you know, critiquing the fund, but are there actually any legitimate critiques of the fund, how it's been rolled out, how it's been handled? And I want to start with you, Mr. President Lavelle, if you don't mind. Are there any legitimate critiques of the fund?
Sure. The most valid and legitimate critique is that we have not gotten as much of the money out into the community, out on the streets, as we would have liked to. And that's a very valid critique. It's a valid concern, and it's one that we are actively working to address. The steps that we're doing now, which is to amend the structure of the fund to allow for better reporting, to allow for better accounting of it, to allow for more, not streamlined, well, both streamlined and transparent was the word I was looking for, way of understanding who and how people are getting funded, is the first step in allowing us to set up the framework for really beginning to expend down the remaining funds. Unfortunately, when the Gainey administration came in, and I mentioned this earlier, and I know I was breaking up, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but they inherited this. We created this under Peduto, but no dollars were ever put in until Gainey, and the Gainey administration had to figure out how to begin to expend these dollars, and it was not easy. And so it began with $1 million pilot. And we figured out how to get those dollars out the door. We did a second round, and now we're on our third and fourth round. But again, to my earlier point with anchor institutions, we're now trying to put sizable dollars on the street, and we're trying to do it for yearly commitments, not a one-time off. But that's a very valid critique, that we have not acted sooner, but we're in a position to do so now, and I believe we're doing so in a very responsible manner.
Absolutely. And you mentioned what you know, City Council is doing now, and of course, the reason that we're having this conversation today is because of the legislation that's going to be happening soon. So, my next question is, how do the pieces of legislation introduced impact the fund?
And I'm sorry, real quick, I want to go back one to add on to, I think, something that Councilman Lavelle said that's really important too, that we've been thinking about and considering, is also that violence doesn't occur on annual funding cycles, right? And so I know that this is also something that, is a critique of our philanthropic community sometimes too, right? That we need to be able to be more flexible and more responsive while also ensuring that we are still having that accountability and structure. And so I think that is also one of the things that we are thinking about. If you look at this legislation, you see it formalizing the current steering advisory committee, right? And formalizing monthly reporting to that committee. So again, that committee is reviewing on a monthly basis public safety data, whether that be from our department directly or from any of our partner organizations, perhaps like Allegheny County, right? Who's feeding us information maybe from their DHS as well. And so that group of folks, who includes city council members, who includes mayor's office staff, who includes public safety staff, are able to make decisions and determinations about how to deploy resources. I think about, and I know, again, I say fortunately or unfortunately, it's coming to Councilman Mosley again, right? But we've had some recent incidents of gun violence across the city. One of them being in Councilman Mosley's district in Garland Park, right? And so as we're sitting around the table as a city, we need to be able to deploy resources when we need to do interventions. And that, again, that can't happen on an annual funding cycle. We need to be able to be both proactive and responsive in how we move these dollars to really tackle gun violence. And so I just wanted to add that as an important piece about what might also be a legitimate critique about the fund, right, is also those annual funding cycles, right? So I think that is something that we've been mindful of, and ensuring that we are thinking through how to be really comprehensive in that respect.
And if I could just interject as well, because I think what Felicity speaks to also brings up another very important point around timing. Mm-hmm. We are in a moment right now where Absolutely. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being cut from violence prevention funds at the federal level. And it was timely that this is, Gun Violence Prevention Month. But more importantly, we are dealing with a reckoning that is being, brought forth by the federal administration. Mm-hmm. And we know already that there's so many important programs that are losing funding. In my district, we're grappling with the potential loss of Job Corps. We're grappling, with the challenges that the Kingsley Association is dealing with. And we know we can forecast right now there's going to be a cascade effect, a domino effect across the ecosystem. And it's so important that we begin this work now to build some sustainability to these organizations in the wake of potential loss of funding coming, through the state and through the county from federal sources. And if we don't act now, by the end of the summer or by the fall, we could be in a really grave situation. So that also speaks to why this moment is so important to get ahead of federal cuts that we know are going to continue to come throughout this year and throughout, the next 3.5 years of the current administration. If we don't act now, we are going to find ourselves in a dire situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like you said, we already seen the effects of this administration and some cuts. In the work that I do, a lot of it is related to the homeless community, and we've already seen the impact. So what can people do, people who are trying to get ahead, trying to get involved, recognizing how many federal dollars get utilized by the county and the city? What can people do to try to advocate to try to keep some of those dollars here?
So first and foremost, I want to thank you for doing this. I'll probably have to go a little early, but what people can most do is ensure that their voices are actually being heard. Mm-hmm. Ensure that the members of council, myself included, Councilman Mosley included, that believe in this work and that say that they care about violence prevention work and say that they care about the health and safety of our residents, that they actually take time to come to council,
share their thoughts, share their opinions. Even those that have benefited and have done the good work, they can share their experiences. They can testify as to why this funding is so critical. Because of Councilman Mosley's point, I do believe others are going to begin looking at this funding as a way to restore a loss of federal funding. And I believe that first and foremost, our job in many respects is the public safety of our city, right? That is at the core of our jobs, is to ensure all residents are kept safe and sound. And therefore, given that the statistics that Felicity mentioned, given that we know this work is working, then those that care need to show up, and they need to be heard, they need to make themselves heard, and they need to provide their voices and their support.
Absolutely. I would add that, you know, a lot of times we don't have, unfortunately, as much influence on the federal level as we would like to. And so in this time of chaos and uncertainty and instability at the federal level, what we really have to turn our attention to is the local level, right? Like the local level is that line of defense for our communities. And so it is, again, just to underscore what Council President Lavelle said, it is so important that folks stay engaged at what's happening at the local level and ensuring that we are protecting these resources so that we don't lose progress, so that we don't end up, as Councilman Mosley said, in that dire situation in a couple months. I mean, one of the other things we know as natural trends of gun violence is that it tends to spike in the summer and around holiday seasons, right? And I mean, you know, we can unpack a little bit about why that is, but we know that we are in that moment now, and to the timing point, you know, you can't debate about these issues for a long period of time and expect that the resources being deployed will be impactful, right? There's a timing to it, so you have to act, and you have to act quickly. You got to be able to be nimble. And so I think that that's really important that folks engage at the local level and really come out and make their voice heard about these resources and about the need here.
And I will say, you know, folks have been doing a fantastic job over the last couple of weeks since Council President and myself have introduced this legislation, obviously working closely with Deputy Chief of Staff Williams, the amount of people talking about it on social media. I was walking out of the city county building about an hour ago. I clearly, Felicity is still in the office. You know, she put in a little bit more hours than me. You know, you get the award for today, but you know, I was walking out and Louise Chris from the city clerk's office said that, you know, there's a good number of folks signed up to speak tomorrow and Wednesday, you know, much more than normal. And that's encouraging to see folks letting their voice be heard. That is the democratic process at work. Folks reaching out to their council members, folks, you know, writing, you know, letters to the editor, to whatever, you know, publication of their choosing, you know, posting videos on social media, making posts on social media. There's definitely been a tremendous response from the community about the importance, you know, of this fund, and not just folks who have directly benefited from the dollars associated with the fund, but folks who have benefited from the work. Folks who've had their communities, you know, transformed by the work of the organizations on the ground. So I want to thank everyone who has spoken up to this point, and everyone who is going to be in council chambers or online tomorrow and Wednesday to have their voice heard, you know, and speak to specificity about why it is important that we, you know, continue to strengthen this fund, you know, to build long-term sustainability for this fund. And as Council President said, most importantly, get the resources to the folks that need it the most.
I would say I used this word earlier today, and I'm going to use it again when we were talking about this. What would be catastrophic is to watch our local legislative leadership mimic what we're seeing at the federal level. I think that would be absolutely catastrophic. I think we need to show leadership at the local level that we are not going to mimic trends, mimic behaviors that are occurring at the federal level, right? We see slashing budgets and reallocating resources. I mean, that's what the Trump administration is doing. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we going to mimic the Trump administration? Or are we going to do what many folks have stood up and said they are going to do and be that line of defense to this federal administration and do things differently. As Council President said, are there areas for improvement? Of course. This is transformative work. This is uncharted waters in a way in the city of Pittsburgh, right? We see models like this across the country, but Pittsburgh is really leading the way in this work when you look at the data of what we're doing. And so, sure, there are always going to be things that we're going to learn from this and we're going to improve. And that's exactly what this legislation is doing. So the idea of throwing, to use the phrase, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, like the idea of just reallocating these resources to something else is absolutely unconscionable. We need to make improvements. We need to take what we have learned and amend and reform the legislation and the trust fund, but we need to keep doing this work because it's important. And it's important that we show that leadership of who we are as a city.
Absolutely. And I'm really, really happy to hear that so many folks are already getting involved and getting the word out there, signing up to speak, showing up. It's extremely important. That support matters. We know that. My next question is for those who are looking to get involved, who are not already engaged, how can people learn more about the fund?
Definitely a number of places. So for one, you will find, and both the councilmen spoke to this, there is conversation happening on social media right now. So you can absolutely look on social media, whether you're looking at either of the councilmen's social media pages, whether you're looking at Mayor Ed Gainey's social media pages. We actually have an event page on social media. So Safer Streets, Protect and Stop the Violence Trust Fund, where we are posting updates and information. I mentioned earlier that the reports and information about the work of the Office of Community Services and Violence Prevention in partnership with those community-based organizations is also available online on the city's website. So folks can go there to learn information. And then, of course, we are public servants. So folks can reach out to us directly. We will do our best to manage that incoming intake, right, over the next couple of days, right? Wednesday's the big day. Wednesday, 10 a.m., July 2nd, City County Building. But we're here to answer questions from folks as well and be able to even just direct folks to resources. The legislative text is available online, right? So all of these resources are at people's fingertips.
Absolutely. That's great. I look forward to more folks getting involved. I will likely be there myself.
Looking forward
hoping
to
see this legislation get passed through. Now, my next question is not necessarily for, myself or for the folks that I typically engage with, but say there's a Pittsburgher out there who does not necessarily see community violence on a regular basis. They just see it on the news. They just see it on Facebook, and they're worried about, what their tax dollars are doing. I mean, why is it important for all of us collectively to be in support of this fund?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think it's important primarily to a point that the council president raised, earlier.
Mm-hmm.
One of our primary roles as local elected officials at the municipal level is public safety.
Mm-hmm.
As a core function of local government is public safety. So, regardless of, whatever, pet policy issues that we are really into, at the end of the day, one of those pet issues has to be public safety. Mm-hmm. And also, I've been very clear in my interviews with the media as well as with other folks who, have legitimate questions and, and valid concerns, about, what is the goal of what we're trying to accomplish with these amendments, and with this legislation is that this is a both and proposition. Mm-hmm. This is not an either or proposition. This is not, public safety versus potholes. It's both and, we will work to find ways to continue to plug potholes and pave our streets and have swimming pools and all the other core functions of our government that we provide as a city. But at the heart of what we do, we have to continue to make our community safer. I feel like there's an exponential benefit mm-hmm. that we have when we make our community safer across all communities, so that, regardless of the zip code, regardless of the income level, when we raise that bar across all neighborhoods, then we improve the quality of life for every Pittsburgher. And I think every Pittsburgher should be invested in that and understand that, you know, that is a path to economic growth. That is a path to population growth. You know, that is a path to, you know, a 21st century Pittsburgh that we can forge and all be proud of for generations to come. You know, but it all starts with safety. If people don't feel safe, it really lowers the quality of life, you know, across the board, and there's a spillover effect. You know, these challenges, particularly associated with public safety, do not adhere to the arbitrary borders of wards and districts and neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
So what happens in one neighborhood today will be in the next neighborhood tomorrow. So let's, you know, deal with it, you know, on the front end, so to speak, proactively, and then we can make, you know, every neighborhood better, you know, and make this city a place we all can be proud of for generations to come.
Yeah, I think the councilman hit on, like, for those, you said, the Pittsburgher out there who might not, who just cares about the dollars and cents, right? Councilman Mosley hit on two really important points here, that public safety is critical to economic growth and population growth for us as a region. Safer communities attract investment, right? So for the people who are just purely numbers, dollars and cents folks, perhaps they don't resonate, as you said, with this community violence message because they don't live in neighborhoods where, or have not grown up experiencing or impacted by community violence directly in the same way that, say, myself or Councilman Lavelle or Councilman Mosley or many of the other people doing this work have been directly and indirectly impacted by gun violence. Just thinking about that economic impact on us as a region, that is also a critical component about why you should care about the broader safety of our region in tackling these issues.
Absolutely. I agree. Going back to the core causes of violence as well. Absolutely. So, I mean, is it safe to assume then that violence prevention is a top priority right now?
Absolutely. I mean, go ahead, Councilman. That's how you're going to jump in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, again, like, you know, like Felicity said so eloquently, that, you know, this is about economic development. You know, this is about community development. This is about individual development. You know, we should be investing in all those things. You know, I know many times we have to look at the big picture, and oftentimes I joke that I'm a 30,000-foot person. You know, but, you know, at an individual level, if we are investing in our young people and in individual Pittsburghers, like the same way the Trade Institute is, and making them the best version that they can be, then we're going to make our city the best version of itself as well. You know, and that's, you know, trying to pull people away from those temptations and those pitfalls that lead people to violence. You know, and if we do that, like I said, you know, we're going to make the best version of Pittsburghers, and then those Pittsburghers are going to make the best version of Pittsburgh, you know, and it's all tied together. You know, we're really, you know, and if we don't, you know, look at it like that, I think we kind of missed the boat. You know, we kind of missed the point of what we're even here for as public servants. That we got to be invested in people. We have to be invested in communities, you know, as well, and understand that it actually will benefit us in a way where actually we all will fill our coffers. You know, we will be generating more tax revenue because more people will be working. You know, more people will be buying houses and property and paying property taxes and paying wage taxes and growing businesses and paying business taxes. You know, all those things will come out of, you know, this work that we're trying to do by investing, you know, in folks who are working in the neighborhoods that have the most challenges and keeping other neighborhoods from having those same challenges. And then we can eradicate it all and work to that vision of zero gun homicides at some point. We're not there yet, but it is an aspiration I think is worth trying to pursue.
Amen.
Absolutely. We're getting there. We're getting there. So is there anything else as we wrap up? Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that y'all would like to share? Any final messages for the folks who are watching and listening?
Council President, would you like the last word?
No, I think you both were extremely eloquent. I think the biggest takeaway is that to invest in this work is to invest in our region, is to invest in our city. And if you care about the ultimate growth of our city, there's no eloquent way to say it. There's no city in America that's growing strictly because white men are doing really well. Cities are growing because they're diverse populations, both socially, ethnically, racially, and people look for that to thrive. In order for this city to grow, we have to have the same thing. In order for us to have the same thing, we have to invest in safe Black and brown communities.
Absolutely.
And if we do that, then yes, we as a city can begin to grow. And so it's in our long-term economic, social, financial interest to do this work.
Well said.
Yep. Amen.
Absolutely. That's a great way to end it. Thank you all so very much for joining us this evening. We hope you learned a lot, about the Stop the Violence Fund, why it's important for us as a community to get involved in the city council sessions this week. Don't forget, Wednesday morning, show up, share this stream with your neighbors, with your friends. Make sure the information is out there. I mean, it's about all of us coming together and doing this work collectively. So thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.